For most people, the concept of camping is a therapeutic one. It's a time to get away from the stressors of modern life, to enjoy the simple things and reconnect with nature. You are miles from home and humanity, sitting by a campfire and sleeping out under the stars, but not all camping stories are quite so cozy. These are a series of chilling stories that follow outdoor enthusiasts into the woods where their first nights of camping were almost their last. Stay tuned to the final story for the creepiest camping trip of all. One of my college professors told us his story. He was camping in the Cordillera Mountains and had his own tent. He woke up in the middle of the night to find a woman with unkempt hair and torn, bloody clothing crawling on all fours towards him. He screamed and woke up. It was a dream. When his friends rushed to his tent to see what was the matter, he told them about his dream, and a few of them became visibly uncomfortable. With all the color draining from their faces, they insisted that they leave the camp as soon as the sun came up. It was only after they had left the mountains that his friends told him that several of them had shared similar dreams. Except in their dreams, they saw a woman crawling into my professor's tent. I've been camping my whole life. It's what I did for fun a lot of the time growing up. Thankfully, I found a wife who is into it also, and we've done a ton of backpacking camping together. A few years ago, we're in the middle of nowhere in Maine, backpacking in the day, and then just walking off the trail into the woods to sleep at night. We're carrying about 10 days worth of food and are deep in the woods. We haven't seen another person in a few days. This is our primary goal, to get away from it all. Normally, I like to just sleep under the stars, but it was drizzling a bit, so we set up our tiny two-person tent and went to sleep. Around sunrise, I wake up and am sitting right outside the tent, putting my boots on while my wife is still asleep. About 30 feet from our tent, I see this dude just standing there, looking at me. He was right out of Central Casting 4, creepy dude who murders campers. I say something stupid to him like, "Good morning, please don't eat us." And he just looked at me for a few seconds, turned around, and walked into the woods. We were out there for another 4 days after this, and I kept waiting for him to jump out from behind every fallen log. I still have no clue how this dude found us or what his deal was. I think about him a lot, trying to figure out what life path led him to our tent that morning. A couple of years ago, my brother bought a large piece of land out in the middle of nowhere, about 30 miles or so from cell phone reception. It's quiet, there's no light pollution, no paved roads, and not a lot of people around. Shortly after he bought the place, two of my brothers, the landowner and another, me and our families spent a weekend camping on the land and doing our best to clean it up. People had used it as a dump, there were many downed trees, etc. On the second night we camped there, I woke up in the middle of the night to take a leak. As I was walking to the bushes in the dark, I realized that I could faintly hear music. This didn't strike me as odd because I knew my brother had a radio in his camper. I finished up and went back to sleep with no further thought on the matter. The next morning at breakfast, I mentioned the radio and music. Several other people recalled waking in the night and hearing music, but no two people heard the same music. Finally, the brother who brought the radio woke up. I asked him about the music and he seemed a bit freaked out. He woke up sometime during the night and went outside to smoke. He heard music as well and had assumed it was someone else. I should mention that he was the only one with a generator and a radio. It wasn't his radio we heard. It wasn't anyone else's either. I've been back several times, but I'm a bit freaked out by that place at night. I have fun while I'm there, but I'm almost always armed and I don't sleep in a tent anymore. I sleep in my SUV with the doors locked. It may seem kind of dumb, but realizing that everyone heard different music when there was no people, no functional radios, and no electricity is quite creepy. My family and I were camping on a lake in central Texas on a week with very few people around. Our spot was on the edge of the camp next to the woods and very close to the edge of the lake. We were playing Pictionary by the campfire the first night we were there when I see a light go by over the lake. I didn't think much of it and was still focused on the game when another one went by at the same speed following the same line. At that point I felt a little bit strange, but still wasn't too worried about it. After that, another went by, and now I pointed out and my dad said he noticed it as well. We walk out past the campfire and campground lights to get a better view of what these were. They continued to fly by over the lake the same speed and staying the exact same distance from each other. They were reddish yellow orbs, and there was no sound coming from them. Now my whole family was watching in awe and disbelief. After about 15 go by, the last one was chased by a white ball of light that was much closer than the rest. We didn't talk much about it after discussing what it could be, but when we got back home from the trip, my mom looked it up and saw that people in a town a few miles from our campsite reported seeing the same thing exactly the way we saw it. Not necessarily camping, but in 1999, I was with some friends hunting deer in northwest Wisconsin. I had just seen the Blair Witch Project a few weeks earlier. We headed to our stands in pitch dark about 5:30 a.m. The woods were dead calm, no wind, no moon, and a light snow had fallen the night before. I mean, it was pitch black. I walked alone in the dark, and when I got about 20 yards from my stand, a deafening scream shattered the silence. Not just once, but it kept going. It sent shivers down my spine and I almost shit myself. It sounded like a cross between a baby crying and someone slowly killing a poodle, and the screaming went on for what seemed like 15 minutes, but I'm sure it was probably less than a minute. I scrambled up the ladder to my stand and quickly loaded my gun. Finally it stopped. I didn't get down all day. Later I figured out it was likely a rabbit that got caught by an owl or a bobcat, but it didn't matter. It scared the shit out of me. When I was young, from age 5 to 11, my dad lived in an old log cabin about 15 miles west of Sheridan, Wyoming, in the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains. Every summer when I was visiting, we would go up into the mountains backpacking and fishing for 2 days every weekend. We would park the truck, hike into a remote area fishing for trout along the way, and make camp wherever we ended up. We encountered a number of strange, creepy things, and got into some scary situations with wildlife, but the one that sticks out with me the most was an ancient abandoned camp we found. We were hiking down a very steep slope to get to an area of a creek that had been dammed up by beavers, hoping to catch some big trout. I had climbed out on a rock ledge and was looking for a way down when I saw the stock and action of an old rusty rifle sticking out of a tree where the tree had grown around the barrel years before and about 10 inches above the ground. Dad and I climbed down to check it out, and we found a small cave at the base of the rock formation, only about 12 feet deep, which would make for a nice natural shelter, but a really terrible place to set up a long-term camp. Inside, we found a bunch of really old stuff. 3 heavy gauge unopened cans of food, an old cast iron pot that had holes rusted all the way through it, a crusty old saddle and bridle set, and a very deteriorated heavy wool blanket rolled up and tied with a leather belt. When we unwrapped the blanket, we found several personal items, including a rusty old cap and ball black powder revolver, a leather satchel with lead pistol shot, a powder horn with no black powder in it, tarnished old cartridges presumably for the rifle in the tree, a straight razor, and most unsettling was a shirt with holes in it, and over half of it was stained with dried blood. As we stood there thinking about what all of this meant, it occurred to me how remote this place was even at that time. It was July of 1985, and the fact that whoever owned that shirt had been very seriously injured, stuck on a steep slope in the middle of absolutely nowhere, where I got serious chills down my spine. The only thing that somewhat dated this fateful campsite was the pistol and the rifle, both of which were made sometime in the 1870s according to my father. There's no way to ever know what happened to the man who owned all this stuff, but the fact that he or someone he knew was obviously shot twice, with either a gun or arrows, and all his belongings were sitting right where he left them, possibly 100 years later, it was highly unlikely that he left the area alive. Discovering what amounts to a 100-year-old crime scene in the very remote wilderness kinda gave me the creeps. But mostly it just made me sad to know how hopeless and alone this guy must have felt when he died. I'm not convinced there's an afterlife or such thing as ghosts or demons, but I once saw something in the woods that felt so unnatural it made me second guess how I see the world. I was hiking up a hillside thick with trees in the middle of the night during a long weekend. Some friends and I decided we would hike to the top of the hill and light off some fireworks. Approaching the hill and surrounding the base of this hill was a rolling grass valley. It was around midnight. Full moon plus a light mist, straight out of a horror movie. Strange part was, I wasn't nervous or scared or anything. I was having a great night with my buddies. I didn't have any of my defenses up. My buddies and I just hiked in a straight line through the rolling grass valley, approaching the hill when something caught my eye. On my right, I saw a tall, shadowy figure standing perfectly upright on the top of the small grassy hill. It was standing there right next to a large, dead tree. I couldn't make out any details. Both the tree and the tall figure were silhouetted under the moonlight. The strange part was seeing this figure didn't scare me. I didn't immediately sense any threat. I almost assumed it might have just been another hiker or somebody having a smoke. I passively turned my flashlight on, and that is when it happened. In an instant, as my light hit that spot where this figure was standing, it instantly moved just outside of range of my flashlight, like it teleported or something. But just as vividly as I saw it standing in its initial spot, as my light hit that spot and the figure moved, I could see it standing just outside the range of my light. My breath paused. In an instant, a wave of dread washed over me. Something felt 100% unnatural about what just happened. As a reflex, I moved my light to the new spot where the figure was, and as my light passed it, it disappeared. I've never passed out in my entire life, not from heat, not from getting knocked out, never. But in that moment, I felt my knees give away from under me and I just fell to the ground. My friends turned and looked at me trying to pick myself up, and my knees were too wobbly to stand. They helped me and I tried explaining to them what I experienced. I'm willing to bet it was all just lights and shadows playing games with my eyes. But I'll never be able to explain that sensation I felt of feeling like I had just seen something I shouldn't have seen. Something so unnatural that my body's instinctual reaction to it was to go limp. When I was about 18, me and some friends took a road trip about 7 hours or so down to the Apalachicola National Forest near Tallahassee, Florida. We were going to do a little car camping, drink a few ice-cold natty lights, 18-year-old stuff. As such, we didn't want to be bothered by any park rangers, so we drove way deep into the woods. Got there, set up camp, had said natty lights, and me and a guy decided to do a little exploring, so we walked about 100 yards from our site back to the main road, saw another path directly across from us, and started walking. Immediately, we started seeing signs that someone had lived there for a while. Big bags of trash, stuff like that. Should have been a huge red flag to turn around, but 18, nothing could hurt us. So we get to this campsite of an older white guy living out of his van. Clotheslines strung up, coolers placed around it, and a big gorgeous dog, I think maybe a golden retriever. We tried to back out, but he sees us and starts talking. He's friendly enough, asks us where we're from, tells us about some cool spots to check out in the park. We end up chatting for 10 minutes and going on our way. I kept thinking to myself how odd it was that he gave directions in steps, not yards or miles. Guy always seemed to be off balance, not stumbling drunk, but like he was walking on a balance beam, swaying side to side. Oh, and he was super excited to talk about the national parks and forests where we were from. Okay, camping part over. We went back to our tents. Fast forward 2 months. Same buddy calls me late at night and tells me to turn on the TV to the news. I oblige. I see an old dude with a van. You see where this is headed, but I didn't, so I get pissed at my friend for waking me up. No, watch. And then I see the golden retriever, and it all clicks. What the f? The man's name was Gary Michael Hilton, convicted of at least 4 murders. He kidnapped and murdered a girl on Blood Mountain, Georgia, an older couple in Pisgah, North Carolina, and a girl in Apalachicola at that campsite not long after we left. Obviously, we call the cops. They put us in touch with the FBI, and we get flown down to take investigators to the campsite, point out every spot we saw anything, tell them exactly what he told us, and show them the places he described to us. I didn't find out until after the trial, but apparently they found what appeared to be partially destroyed human finger bones in an area near the site. Had to fly down again to testify.
For more videos about the paranormal and the unexplained, please like and subscribe to the Oddities Observed channel.